The more I listened, Mr. Speaker, to both front benches describing the bloody, putrid sea of misery that is Gaza, the more I was amazed that both of them continue to support the supply of British arms and military components to the country that's doing all this. No one could understand that. And the more he said how hard they were trying, and personally I believe him, seems a sincere chap. But why isn't it working?
The reality remains nothing has changed. The bombs are still falling, the children are still starving, and the civilians are still dying. So let me ask the Minister a very simple question. Does international humanitarian law even mean anything anymore when the UK and international community continue to refuse to draw a line?
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Israel's right to self-defence comes with clear responsibility. Gaza has become a conflict hellhole, and the delivery of more humanitarian aid from the international community, including the UN, is non-discretionary.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Oxfam has reported that 1.1 million people are projected to be facing catastrophic levels of food insecurity in Gaza, and children are now starving. Samantha Power, Administrator of the USAID, told US Congress last week that northern Gaza is now experiencing famine. Does the government share that assessment, and how will aid get there?
Minister.
We continue to be very concerned about the humanitarian challenges that are in place in Gaza. And as I've highlighted to the House, we are pressing really hard. We're taking steps ourselves. We've increased the amount of aid that we're committing to the region, and we're focusing laser-like to seek Israel to step up to the commitments they've made. They've already made some limited progress. We need to see more.
Jemson.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Israel's right to self-defence comes with clear responsibility. Gaza has become a conflict hellhole, and the delivery of more humanitarian aid from the international community, including the UN, is non-discretionary. But could the Minister please confirm to the House that everything possible is being done with the Israeli government to ensure that non-combatants are being supported and are not being inadvertently targeted or hit?
We've highlighted this with the Israeli government, and I can confirm to my honourable friend that we are pushing incredibly hard. Not only are we increasing the amount of aid that we've given to the region, highlighted to the region, but we want to make sure that that gets through as well. And we've already deployed a number of airdrops which have helped, but there's a lot more that needs to be done.
Imran Hussain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As has been said, over 33,000 killed, 70% of whom are women and children. The ICJ has warned of a genocide, and more than 1 million are left starving, while almost 2 million are displaced from their homes. Yet, even as the Foreign Office's own legal advice, which they continually refuse to make public, is purported to declare that the Israeli military are breaking international law, and the UN Security Council pass a resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire, the reality remains nothing has changed. The bombs are still falling, the children are still starving, and the civilians are still dying. So let me ask the Minister a very simple question. Does international humanitarian law even mean anything anymore when the UK and international community continue to refuse to draw a line?
I understand the passion, I understand his concern about the area, but we continue to have grave concerns about the humanitarian access as well. But this is not sufficient to undermine our judgment that Israel is committed to complying with IHL in general.
Israel's military is reported to be using lavender, an artificial intelligence system, to help choose its bombing targets in Gaza. This is machine decision-making over human decision-making, and arguably sacrifices accuracy in favour of speed. The lavender system identifies targets which are only reviewed for 20 seconds before authorisation of a strike. What discussions has the Minister had with MOD colleagues about the use of AI in combat to the concerns over error rates and the humanitarian impact on the ground.
Minister.
Too many civilians have been killed, and we want to see Israel take greater care to limit its operations to military targets and avoid harming civilians and destroying homes. That's the message we give to the Israeli government when we engage with them.
John MacDonald.
The situation in Gaza is having its impact on the West Bank. Tragically, this week, a 14-year-old Israeli child was found dead, and that set off a process of settlers rampaging across the West Bank. We now know that 4 Palestinians have been killed and others brutally attacked. The evidence is that the IDF soldiers stood to one side and allowed that to happen. A meeting with Israeli colleagues this morning, we hear that the Israeli government now is arresting legal and peace observers in the West Bank. Could the government now make it very, very clear to the Israeli government that observers should be allowed to operate within the West Bank to ensure that peace is maintained, but also could we have a report now in detail on the sanctions that the government is applying to Israeli settlements and Israeli settlers?
Minister.
I don't know the detail of some of the earlier points that he'd made. I'll welcome receiving that. But in terms of the sanctions, we put them in place. My understanding and memory is that on 2 individuals, we keep this under review constantly, because those actions and what happens in the settlements are important, and the implications it has for the West Bank.
Hammer.
Thank you very much. The escalation of recent days has been deeply worrying. We have 2 nuclear-armed countries exchanging ballistics, and neither with any reputation for care about civilian lives, and both with agendas of their own. That escalation has occupied the headlines, but the people of Gaza continue to suffer unrelenting military attacks and starvation. The rules-based order and international law have suffered lasting damage, including by the targeting of aid workers and medics. The UK's influence with an out-of-control Netanyahu government has yielded very little. One of the few legal tools available is the suspension of arms export licences. When will the government use that?
Minister.
As I said in previous answer, our assessment on export license remain unchanged. We've got one of the world's most robust export systems in the world, enshrined in law through the Export Control Act and implemented through our strategic export licensing criteria. I think it's really important that she recalls and notes not just the humanitarian situation in Gaza, but also what's happening through Iran's destabilising activities as well.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Humanitarian agencies have concluded that we have passed the point of being able to avert famine in Gaza. Whatever we do now, it will be too late for those people who will have starved to death by the time the aid arrives. That is a stain on the international community. Can the Minister update the House on what specific steps this government has taken to bring about the full implementation of Resolution 2728 passed by the UN Security Council over 3 weeks ago? Pleading, pressuring, pressing the Israeli government clearly is not a strategy that is working. So why doesn't the UK government recognise that consequences and concrete actions can start with the stopping of arms sales to Israel?
Minister.
We are urging, we're pleading, we're doing everything that we can. We're doing everything that we can to make our case. And we're also tripling the amount of aid that we have to 100 million. And, as I said as well, we're taking action to have this life-saving aid corridor by sea to Gaza. These are important actions that we're taking forward.
Colin Lockhart.
Thank you. Having seen the drone attacks on Israel at the weekend, it is disappointing to watch the government and US administration basically telling the Israelis to roll over and accept this aggression by Iran. It was, however, encouraging to see an alliance of air forces assist the Israelis to protect their people. I do wonder why there is little condemnation of this aggression against Israel and continued acknowledgement. Had October the 7th never happened, there would be none of this happening. Therefore, what is this government doing to ensure both Gazans and Israelis are free from Hamas and Iranian aggression respectively and can live normal lives? And as we say in the UK, Israel has the right to defend itself.
Minister.
I agree, the government agrees that Israel does have the right to defend itself, and as part of our approach to finding and putting in place, enabling to put in place a sustainable ceasefire, the role of Hamas has to be put clearly in place. It must not have the influence it has at the moment, and its ability to fire rockets into Israel will need to be completely diminished to enable that sustainable ceasefire to take action.
Still a creasing.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister will know his words are not cutting through. Hamas was wrong to reject the ceasefire, but what Israel does next is not inevitable. And yet the Minister for Defence on Monday evening said that they were waiting for aid to be delivered to Rafah and for civilians to leave, and then they would begin the military operation. He will know there is nowhere for these people to go, and there is no food elsewhere. It is an impossible choice for people. A few pita breads will not cut it for millions of people at risk of starvation and at risk of harm from a military operation in Rafah. So what will the UK do if Israel proceeds with its threat to enter Rafah?
Minister.
As the Honourable Member knows, I respect her enormously, and we've worked together on a number of issues. All I would just say on this, vitally important, is that we want to urge restraint about this proposed military operation by the Israelis. We are also calling for restraint in response to what's happened with Iran, although notably the RAF and others were there to provide support to defend Israel from that attack from Iran. So the Foreign Secretary is in Israel, is in the region this week to tackle these very issues and address the points that I've made.
Marshal de Cordova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Monday, in response to my question about restoring UNRWA funding, the Prime Minister said that, along with allies, he was reviewing the interim findings. In subsequent responses to other honourable members, he said he was waiting for a final report, now which was due at the end of April. We know that this report is due on the 20th. Can we have a government statement on Monday where the government sets out a clear pathway back to restoring funding? The UK is the only major donor, aside from the United States, that have not restored their funding. Time is running out and lives are being lost.
I recognise the importance of the point she's made, and all I would say, as I said previously, we're waiting for the report, and then we will update Parliament on our decision. We need to review this report in detail.
George Galloway.
17 repetitions of "we're waiting for the report" will become the new definition of complacency. The more I listen, Mr. Speaker, to both front benches describing the bloody, putrid sea of misery that is Gaza, the more I was amazed that both of them continue to support the supply of British arms and military components to the country that's doing all this. No one could understand that. And the more he said how hard they were trying, and personally I believe him, seems a sincere chap. But why isn't it working? If you're trying so hard while scrambling your jets to defend Israel, giving arms to Israel, why won't they listen to you?
What I say with respect is that the questions that have been asked to me, I think, are entirely appropriate and understandable given the circumstances. I've responded as best I can from the government's perspective. I think the honourable gentleman knows from his extensive experience that the situation on the ground is hugely, hugely complex. We're working night and day. Our officials in SCDO are working flat out. We're providing the support we can for Israel and to help tackle the destabilisation. So I understand the passion that he asked these questions for, but he should also understand these are incredibly complex situations. We're endeavouring to do everything we can with Israel to make our case, but they are also having to think about the implications of what's happening and act after a terrible, tragic attack by Hamas and responses by Iran as well.